The 24-hour tube strike on paper has just ended. With stations closed across the capital, it's been unlike any tube strike we've seen before. The two sides disagree on how much impact the action had today, but the disruption is far from over tonight. This afternoon, TfL's advice to tube passengers was to complete their journeys by 6. But what of those who simply couldn't do that? Our political correspondent Simon Harris on why the action was called and how London coped.
Rush hour at Britain's busiest railway station, and the fallout from the tube strike is turning nasty. The platforms were evacuated because of overcrowding. Train drivers were told not to stop. And at the ticket barriers, frustrated commuters had had enough.
We all knew this was going to happen. Why have they not organised this better?
Well, I've been here for 2 hours now. Actually meant to be going for an interview in London, so no idea what's going to happen, you know. It's just an absolute, it's a shocker.
They closed all exits on that side, saying this will be the next re-entrance. 2 hours labbing here for 2 hours. 2 hours they said there's going to be that entrance. Now, I'm not prepared to go to the other entrance because that queue there is going to be way longer than this one.
It was left to the police to try to calm things down.
I've been trying to get people through and the railway has said no.
On the roads, the red glow of tail lights and luminous dazzle of headlights told another story. London's notoriously congested streets were gridlocked. There was no easy way to beat the strike, and many commuters simply didn't bother. On Central Line trains from Ealing Broadway, at this time, it's normally standing room only. By 8:30, London Underground claimed to have trains running on all but 3 lines. But for commuters trying to get into central London, these shuttle services were of limited value. Central Line trains from Ealing deposited their passengers at an eerily quiet White City, leaving them in many cases stranded.
I'm trying to do a journey planner now, so I think I'm going to have to get a replacement bus journey or try and get one of the other trains down there.
What are your bosses going to say?
I don't know yet.
I'm working in the Kensington High Street, and now I'm going back home.
These fashion students thought they had the ultimate 21st century answer, Uber. Then they checked the prices.
So last night it was 15 to 20, and then this morning it's gone up to 80 now because of the demand.
The tube carries 4 million passengers a day. Transport for London's contingency plan involved an extra 150 buses. The pressure on bus stops was predictable. This is not a new dispute. It's almost 2 years since underground workers first went on strike over ticket office closures and staffing levels at stations.
Well, we want to get around the negotiating table on Underground. We want to see if we can get a deal that resolves the issues at the heart of this dispute. But if we don't, then there's a possibility of more industrial action, yes.
London's mayor is so proud of his record of no strikes on the tube, he recently made a video to say so.
Since I became mayor, the number of days lost to strikes in the Underground has reduced by 92%. Of course, I'm disappointed by the decision by trade unions to strike today. The only way to resolve differences is amicably around a table. Ultimately, that's how we're going to resolve this. That's why I think today's strike was completely unnecessary.
But of course, it wasn't just the mayor who felt the full force of tube unions once again flexing their muscle. Simon Harris, ITV News, Central London.
Let's return to our political correspondent Simon Harris. Hard day for commuters, no doubt. It doesn't look good, though, for either the mayor or the unions, does it?
Well, it's certainly awkward for the mayor after he so publicly stated that, unlike his predecessor, he would talk to the trade unions involved in disputes. The trouble is they're not listening. The unions walked out of negotiations at the weekend after rejecting London Underground's promise to recruit an extra 200 station staff. The mayor's political opponents wasted no time trying to maximise his embarrassment, pointing out that during his election campaign he vowed to roll up his sleeves to ensure 0 strike days, and also that one of the unions involved, the TWSA, part bankrolled his mayoral campaign. Of course, the mayor knows all this, and he did concede today that the buck stops with him.
There is little respite for commuters, for passengers, though, because this one has ended, the disruption continues, and there's another southern strike on its way.
Yes, tomorrow sees the start of the next wave of strikes by ASLEF drivers on Southern. 2 days starting tomorrow, a further strike on Friday, another one at the end of the month. And as everyone on Southern knows, a driver's strike means no trains at all. But of course, for many commuters in London, there's a real struggle to get home tonight because of the tube strike.
Sure. Simon, thank you. For 140 years, Kempton Park has been home to top-class horse racing. It is the home of Boxing Day racing and has been the making of horses from Desert Orchid to Courto Star. Well, it may be no more, as the Jockey Club announced today it wants to sell it off so 3,000 new homes can be built on it. One racing expert called it a gross act of sporting vandalism. Simon Harris has the details and the reaction.
It's a historic racecourse with an unexpected future as prime real estate. For almost a century and a half, Kempton Park has played host to the sport of kings. But now the owners, the Jockey Club, have decided to cash in on booming house prices. The famous jumps are likely to be replaced by thousands of new homes. It's not hard to see why this large open space on the edge of London with its own railway station would have developers licking their lips. And the Jockey Club thinks it can make more than £100 million from selling Kempton Park. The highlight of Kempton's year is the King George VI chase on Boxing Day. Racing from Kempton is a Christmas tradition.
Wayward Lad wins it from $50 more in second place.
The statues in front of the grandstand are a reminder of some of the great names associated with this course.
Many people have grown up seeing Desert Orchid win lots of King Georges, the White Christmas of the horse behind me, who won 4 times. And for those of the more recent generation, Courto Star won 5.
The Jockey Club says the King George will move to Sandown Park at Esher, and the proceeds of selling Kempton will go back into the sport.
It's a unique opportunity for the Jockey Club to realise significant capital that it can reinvest for the good of British racing.
Do you think it's a bit sad, though, to see the end of racing here?
Kempton Park is a fantastic and very profitable racecourse. The Jockey Club acts for the good of British racing, and it's been a tough decision.
For some of Kempton's neighbours, it's not a tough decision, but an appalling one.
This is about a shed load of money, and that's all it's about. Frankly, one expects more from an organisation of which the Queen is the patron.
Don't you accept there is a need for housing?
There is a need for housing, but we are, like all the other boroughs on the periphery of London, are having to deal with the fact that London doesn't cope with its own population.
To me, it seems like an act of gross sporting vandalism, to be honest. I mean, Kempton Park is one of the most historic and prestigious racecourses we have in Britain.
When Thistlecrack won the King George 2 weeks ago, few of the punters watching had any idea this famous racecourse was entering its final furlong. If the redevelopment is approved by local councillors, the horses and jockeys will be gone by 2021. Simon Harris, ITV News, Kempton Park.
What chance the Garden Bridge will ever now get built? When Sadiq Khan became mayor, he said he was going to refuse to fund it until he knew more about the finances behind it. Today, the Trust, trying to raise the cash, admitted they were struggling to hit their target. And they, in turn, blamed the mayor for putting investors off. What makes matters worse is that any delays make the build ever more expensive. Here's our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
Navigating the Thames at this point should by now be an obstacle course of builders' barges and pile drivers. But there's still no sign of work on the troubled Garden Bridge. And today, accountants for the charitable trust behind the project offered an explanation for the delay and a gloomy update on the finances. Trustees are unable to conclude that the trust is a going concern and feel it only appropriate to flag these risks in this report.
What they're saying is actually they just don't know because there's just too many uncertainties, and therefore rather than saying we can't continue, which they can't conclude, they're just telling you what the uncertainties are.
That makes it even harder for the trust to raise money. Corporate backers don't like uncertainty, and the delays to the start of construction are pushing up the price. The Garden Bridge Trust blames its problems on factors beyond its control, including legal challenges, lengthy negotiations over land and the arrival of a new mayor. It's now warning the final cost of the project could be much higher than the current estimate of £185 million.
Any delay will have an impact on the total cost, and at this stage it's difficult to predict what that will be.
So how much might it finally cost?
Well, at the moment the cost is £185 million, but if there are further delays, then that will have an impact and the cost will rise.
To what?
At this stage we don't know what that will be. It will be totally dependent on what delays we face.
The project has already swallowed £40 million of public money. The bridge's opponents say enough is enough.
The Garden Bridge project needs to stop. It is not fair in a time where Londoners are struggling that any public money is going into a project that today has admitted it doesn't know how much it's going to cost.
The Garden Bridge Trust said today it was confident it could raise all the money needed and work would finally start sometime this year.
I've got to ask you the question I posed earlier. What chance this bridge will ever now get built?
Well, that's the biggest uncertainty of all. The one thing the Trust says it really needs is for Sadiq Khan to sign off a guarantee that City Hall will underwrite the £3 million a year maintenance cost. Now, the Trust says it's confident it can raise the money, but that guarantee is a condition of planning permission. Boris Johnson was happy to give it, but the current mayor wants to review it. On top of that, he's commissioned his own audit of the entire project being carried out by Dame Margaret Hodge MP. All that means more uncertainty, making it harder to attract corporate and charitable backers. And there's a looming deadline to all this, because unless work starts before the end of 2017, the planning permission expires.
The clock is ticking. Simon Harris, thank you.
Now, it's hardly snowmageddon out there, but we're in the midst of the worst weather of the winter right now. The gritters are out and hundreds of flights to and from London's airports have been cancelled. Well, this is the Brecon Beacons in Wales this afternoon. As you can see, they've had quite deep snow in parts. And by contrast, this is central London. It's dark and miserable and wet, very wet in fact, and it's actually just started snowing. Well, Simon Harris has been looking at how London has been preparing.
It wasn't a blizzard, but rush hour London got its first taste of snow tonight. This was Pinner. For those charged with keeping the capital moving, the weathermen's warning was enough to set alarm bells ringing. Even if it didn't settle, at the very least it would be icy.
We expect the temperatures to drop. That could make things quite icy tonight, hence the reason for doing the gritting and the de-icing on the railway network. And then there's a big question about whether further rain tonight is rain or snow, and whether that snow actually stays and sits on the carriageway on the rail network.
At council depots across London and the home counties, they were wondering if this would be the first big test of winter. The gritters were being loaded. On pavements, grit bins have been filled.
We asked residents to go out and use that grit to help us to help them. They can grit the pavements in their area. We've provided 2,000 snow shovels for residents to do a bit of digging out if they need to. But we encourage residents to look after each other and do their bit for the community and help us to help them.
Grit isn't in short supply. London has stockpiled enough to last until May. Of course, the Met Office doesn't always get it right. The precautions might turn out to be unnecessary, but those in charge are haunted by the ghost of winters past. In 2009, London was the subject of international ridicule when snow shut down the bus network. The lessons weren't learnt. A year later, snow caused chaos and misery at Heathrow. Today, the airport cancelled 80 flights in what was called a preemptive measure.
It is really frustrating because you look at other airports where they're faced with much worse weather conditions than at Heathrow, and they don't have the same level of cancellations that you get at Heathrow. But the problem is that it is at full capacity and it's got no wriggle room to allow for de-icing planes, de-icing the runway.
So how well prepared is London tonight?
We are really ready for everything that's coming tonight.
What could possibly go wrong? Simon Harris, ITV News, Central London.
In the middle of the worst train strike in memory, Sadiq Khan today refused to help the government choose the companies that run London's rail services. The mayor has always said he wants more control of the capital's overground services as well as the tube, but said today he wouldn't accept the invitation because it was a fundamentally flawed process. The snub comes on the third day of the Southern Rail strike, which has seen commuters face a week of disruption to their travel and their lives. With the latest, here's our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
Strike days on Southern have become a tale of two railways, deserted platforms and empty trains on some lines, rush hour crushes on others. This is the Overground, where once again stations were suddenly being closed because of overcrowding. Commuters at New Cross Gate are getting used to being collateral damage.
Every morning this week I've come up here and then there's been some sort of issue, so something needs to be sorted out.
It took me 2 hours plus to my place of work, which normally is just an hour.
Nothing we can do, walk a mile that way to New Cross.
Union men, all for one for all, put other people that are working class out of work.
Transport for London said it didn't own enough trains to run extra services.
We only own a certain number of trains, and there's only a certain number of trains we can run on the East London line. We've been running the maximum that we can. We've even been operating some additional shuttle trains to help.
The fallout from the southern dispute is increasingly being shared by passengers on other routes. There were also signs today of worsening relations between Transport Secretary Chris Grayling and London's Mayor. Sadiq Khan rejected an invitation from Mr Grayling to play a key role in awarding commuter rail franchises. This row involves yet another train company, South Eastern. The Mayor thinks he can run it better. The Transport Secretary disagrees and made his feelings about Mr Khan perfectly clear yesterday.
I actually don't take the Mayor's promises at face value, I'm afraid, Mr Speaker. And what we have taken is a partnership approach that also listens to the people of Kent, who are equally important in this franchise.
Despite that, Mr Grayling does want Mr Khan to have a say in how the new South Eastern timetables operate. Mr Khan isn't interested, dismissing the franchise process today in a statement. It is a repeatedly tried and failed approach. I'm therefore left with no choice but to walk away from the government's fundamentally flawed plans. The Department for Transport said that was disappointing. The Mayor's Conservative opponents at City Hall accused him of throwing his toys out of the pram. London's rail lines this week have been a fertile breeding ground for discontent.
Haven't they just? Look, it's finally Friday for Southern's commuters, but they won't have to wait long for more strike action, will they?
No, this week does feel like it's been particularly grim, especially as it started on Monday with that tube strike, which I think had a bigger impact than many people expected. Then we've had the 3 days of Southern strikes by ASLEF drivers, and that's not going to go away. There is no hint of optimism that that dispute might be sorted. Far from it. The week after next, 3 more strikes by the drivers, but it's going to be even worse because the RMT, which represents guards, is re-entering the fray with a strike on the Monday. So strikes for 4 days that week. On the tube strike, the RMT has threatened to escalate its action, which might mean 48-hour strikes instead of 24-hour strikes. So far, the union hasn't announced any dates, and there are, at least on that dispute, some talks at ACES on Monday.
Simon, thank you.